Look at your left palm, not the right one, the left. There, at the base of the thumb, right where the flesh rises before the main crease, some people carry a shape, a curve, a crescent moon etched into the skin as if someone had traced it before you were born. Some have it marked with a fine, precise line. Others carry it as a slight elevation of the skin, almost imperceptible, visible only when the light falls at a certain angle. And most people have never looked at it closely. They overlook it just as they overlook hundreds of things written on their bodies since day one. But a text exists. A text that was buried in the desert of Egypt nearly 1,700 years ago, discovered inside a sealed clay jar in 1945, which speaks with truly disconcerting precision about exactly this. Not about luck, not about fate in the superficial sense used in magazine horoscopes, but about something much older and much more specific. The relationship between the moon, the left hand, and what the Valentinian Gnostics called the pneuma, the divine breath trapped inside matter. The Gospel of Philip, that is the text. And what it says, when you truly read it, when you sit with it as its authors expected you to do, does not sound like ancient superstition. It sounds like a precise description of something that still happens, of something that happens to specific people who carry a specific image in a specific place on their body, and most of those people have never known how to read it. If you have that crescent moon on your left palm, stay, because what this text says about it has not been presented this way anywhere else. I do not say this as an opening hook. I say it because it is literally true. The connection I am going to show you tonight requires reading the entire text, reading the tradition that surrounds it, reading the adversaries who documented it while attacking it, and uniting all of that into a single coherent reading. And that is what we will do, step by step, just as the text itself asks to be done. Nag Hammadi, Upper Egypt, December 1945. A peasant named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging at the foot of the limestone cliff that borders the desert in the Kina region when his mattock struck something hard under the sand. It was a sealed clay jar, nearly 3 feet high, its neck clogged with a hardened clay mixture. For a few seconds he did not know whether to open it. There were local legends about jars like that. Some enclosed jinns, others curses, others were animal tombs. Finally, he struck it hard. What came out was not gold. It was not a curse. It was papyri. 13 codices bound in dark brown leather, written in Coptic, which had been buried in that jar since some point in the 4th century of our era. Someone had hidden them carefully, deliberately, wrapping some of them in extra protective materials, probably to save them from a purge. And they had survived 1,600 years under the heat of the Egyptian desert without anyone knowing they were there. Those papyri contained 52 tractates, texts that the official Christian church had condemned to silence, texts that historians believed destroyed forever, known only through the attacks their adversaries had dedicated to them in the early centuries. Among them was the Gospel of Thomas, the Apocryphon of John, the Hypostasis of the Archons, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, and the Gospel of Philip. That is the official name in academic literature, Gospel of Philip. Second tractate of Codex II of the Nag Hammadi Library, pages 51 to 86 of the Coptic manuscript. Written in Coptic, almost certainly translated from a Greek original composed in Syria, possibly in the city of Edessa, around the 3rd century of our era. Attributed by specialists to the Valentinian school, one of the most sophisticated, influential, and systematically persecuted Gnostic currents of early Christian antiquity. Why is it called the Gospel of Philip? Not because the Apostle Philip wrote it, nor because it is a narrative gospel in the sense we know from Mark, Luke, or John. The name comes from an internal passage of the text on page 73, where Philip appears as a witness to a scene between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. His presence at that structural moment gave it the title. The text itself is something different, a collection of theological reflections, parables, aphorisms, and visions organized without a clear timeline, built to be meditated upon, not read straight through, to be returned to time and again, to reveal different layers depending on where the reader is when returning to them. Elaine Pagels, who devoted decades of academic work to the Nag Hammadi texts and whose book The Gnostic Gospels became a fundamental reference for the field, describes the Gospel of Philip as an extraordinarily dense work of sacramental theology. Bentley Leighton, in his critical edition of the Gnostic texts, notes that the Gospel of Philip operates on multiple semantic layers simultaneously. What it says on the surface is rarely the only thing it says. What seems like a simple observation about baptism or anointing contains, underneath, an entire cosmology that only becomes visible when one has the map of the symbols the text uses. And that map is what we need now. Because what the Gospel of Philip says about the left, about the moon, and about those who carry certain marks on their material body cannot be read without first understanding the cosmology that underlies every word. Let us go straight to the text, because that is always the first thing to do. The Gospel of Philip, on page 53 of the Codex, contains one of the most disconcerting statements in all of ancient Gnostic literature. The text says, in the Coptic translation by scholar Wesley Eisenberg for the Nag Hammadi collection, light and darkness, life and death, right and left, are brothers of one another. It is impossible to separate them from one another. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor the evil evil, nor is life life, nor death death. Sit with that statement for a moment. It does not say that darkness is bad and light is good in a simple opposition. It does not say that the right is up and the left is down in a moral hierarchy where one is preferable to the other. It says they are brothers, that they are inseparable, that the division we think we see between them is, at some fundamental level, a division that only exists within the material world, and that beyond it, that separation does not hold. But then the text continues, and here is where the Gospel of Philip becomes uncomfortable in the best possible sense. Because after saying they are inseparable in the world, it adds something that completely changes the reading. Therefore, in the world, virtues are divided, and the things of the left are different from those of the right. But the Gnostic is not divided in that way. He goes beyond that separation, and in him the things of the left and the things of the right become one single thing. What does this mean? To understand it, one must understand the cosmology underneath the text, and that cosmology is Valentinian. The Valentinians took their name from Valentinus, a 2nd century Christian theologian who taught in Rome around the year 150 of our era. Valentinus developed one of the most complex and influential theological systems of Christian antiquity. His disciples spread across the Mediterranean and left texts that, for centuries, we only knew through the quotes their adversaries included when attacking them. The discovery of Nag Hammadi in 1945 changed that forever. Now we have their own words. The Valentinians believed that reality was structured in layers. In the highest layer was the pleroma, the divine fullness, the totality of spiritual being, what we might call God in his purest and most complete state, without matter, without imposed form, without external limit. The pleroma was not a person or a place. It was a condition of being, the fullness that needs nothing outside itself to exist. Below the pleroma, as a result of a fracture in that fullness, the material world emerged. That fracture was caused by Sophia, one of the aeons of the pleroma, an emanation of fullness that acted in an unbalanced way. She wanted to know the Father without her complementary partner. The result of that action was the fall of a part of her essence outside the pleroma, and from that fallen essence arose the world of matter, created by an entity the Gnostics called the demiurge, a cosmic architect who built the material world believing he was the supreme God, ignorant that above him existed an infinitely higher and fuller reality. Within that material world, trapped in bodies of flesh and bone, some souls carry with them a spark of the pleroma, a part of the original divine breath that fell into the world of matter when the fullness fractured. Those souls, the Valentinians called pneumatikoi, the spiritual ones, those who carry the pneuma, the living breath of the pleroma, inside their material being. And here is where the text becomes specific in a way that is almost never cited. The Gospel of Philip distinguishes on several of its pages between light that is generated and light that is reflected. Light that is generated comes from the sun. It is born of the sun. It is light in its origin, in its source, in its own proper nature. In Valentinian cosmology, the sun represents the pleroma, the divine fullness that radiates from itself without needing any exterior source. Sunlight owes nothing to any other body. Light that is reflected comes from the moon. The moon has no light of its own. It receives light from the sun and returns it transformed, softened, fragmented, colder, dimmer, but also more intimate, more sustainable for eyes that live in darkness. In the cosmology of the Gospel of Philip, the moon represents exactly that. The material world, which has no light of its own, but contains within itself reflections of the pleroma, fragments of light trapped in dark matter, visible because they reflect something coming from higher up. The text, on page 58 of the Codex, says something that has puzzled translators for decades. Images are visible to human beings. The light within them, however, is hidden in the image of the light of the Father. This light will reveal itself, but the image will be consumed by the light. What is an image in the language of the Gospel of Philip? Not a photograph, not a decorative symbol. An image in this text is anything in the material world that contains within itself a reflection of the higher spiritual reality. The human body is an image, a flower is an image, a name is an image, and a mark on the skin, a curve etched into the palm from birth, is also an image. The mark is not the meaning, the mark is the window toward the meaning. Now let us go to the left palm, because the question that matters is this: why left? In the Gospel of Philip, left and right are not simply spatial positions. They are cosmological orientations that the text uses consistently throughout its 86 pages. The text is explicit on page 54. Within a section that speaks of the types of beings that inhabit the material world, the Gospel of Philip distinguishes between those oriented toward the right of the Father and those oriented toward the left. Those toward the right are those who have already fully received the light of the pleroma, those who live oriented toward the source, those whom the text calls in another passage the children of the bridal chamber. Those toward the left are those who are still in process, those who carry within themselves the spark of the pleroma but have not yet fully recognized it, those who contain the light but still experience it as a reflection. Notice what this does not say. It does not say that those on the left are condemned. It does not say they are lost in the sense of being irretrievable. It says they are on the way, that they carry the spark, but the spark has not yet completed its work within them. That they are, in the language the text itself suggests, lunar, reflecting, not yet generative. In the Valentinian tradition, being of the left was not a moral condemnation. It was a description of a state of the process, a state that had its own dignity, its own function, and its own time of transformation. The left hand is, in this symbolic context, the hand of what is still becoming, the hand that holds the process, not the result, the hand that belongs to the side where the divine spark is still learning to recognize itself from within the world of matter. And the moon etched on that left hand is, according to the internal logic of the text, the image of exactly that. There is a central concept in the Gospel of Philip that organizes its entire theological architecture, the bridal chamber. On pages 67, 71, 74, and 76 of the Codex, the text speaks of a sacrament that the Valentinians placed above all others. In Greek, they called it koitonos, the bridal chamber. But it was not a wedding in the ordinary sense. It was a process of cosmic reunion, the divine spark trapped in the material body and its spiritual counterpart in the pleroma, a reunion between what fell into the world and what remained in the fullness, between the reflection and the source. The text says on page 67 with a precision that is anything but accidental, "The Lord did everything in a mystery, a baptism, an anointing, a Eucharist, a redemption, and a bridal chamber, 5 sacraments." And the last one, the bridal chamber, was the one the Valentinians considered the highest, the one that completed the process, the one that reunited what the fracture of the pleroma had separated. Who could enter that bridal chamber? The Gospel of Philip is surprisingly specific. Not everyone, not by acquired moral merit, not by cultivated virtue, but by nature. The text says that there are those who are children of the bridal chamber, and that being a child is not something learned or earned, but something carried since before the first memory. And here appears the concept directly related to what we are exploring, the seal. The word seal in Coptic Kragas appears several times in the Gospel of Philip. On page 74, within the context of those who have received the pneuma, the text speaks of those who have been sealed. That seal is not metaphorical in the vague sense we use that word today. For the Valentinians, the seal was a real, concrete mark that identified the bearer as someone belonging to the lineage of the pneuma, not a mark acquired, a mark brought. Irenaeus of Lyon, in his work Against Heresies, written around the year 180 of our era, documents Valentinian teachings with irritation and detail. Irenaeus was an avowed adversary, but his description, though hostile, is historically invaluable. He describes how the Valentinians taught that the pneumatikoi, the spiritual ones, were born with marks on their bodies indicating their nature. Marks that, according to Irenaeus, his followers used as a criterion for recognizing one another. The term that appears in the Greek texts surrounding this tradition for these marks is semeion, sign. Not in the sense of a warning. In the original philosophical and medical sense of the Greek word, a sign that indicates the nature of something, like the sign that allows a doctor to know a patient's condition before the patient utters a single word. The symptom does not cause the illness. The symptom reveals it. The mark on the skin as a semeion of the internal nature, not as a cause, not as a certainty, as a reading. And here is where the Gospel of Philip, combined with the tradition surrounding it, says something that deserves a truly long pause. The moon, as we have seen, represents in this system the state of one who carries the divine spark but still experiences it as a reflection and not as a direct source. The left palm is the palm of the process, of becoming, of the being that is still on the way to recognizing its origin. And the crescent moon as a semeion, as a sign inscribed on that palm, would be, according to the internal logic of this tradition, the mark of the pneuma in process, not of the realized pneuma, not of the enlightened one who has completed the reunion with the pleroma and no longer needs any kind of external sign because he no longer lives in the world of signs, but of the pneuma that is still searching, of the spirit that still lives in the world of reflections, that still experiences light as something it receives and not as something it generates from within itself. The Gospel of Philip, on page 73, says something that illuminates this from a different angle. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing. That is to say, recognition does not happen afterward. It does not happen in another life or on another plane that one reaches when the material body ends. It happens now, in this body, in this palm, in this precise moment when someone looks at their left hand and recognizes a shape that they do not know exactly why they have the feeling it should matter. That recognition, that moment of questioning is, in the language of the Gospel of Philip, the beginning of the process that the text describes as entering the bridal chamber. Before going further, I want to stop you here. What you are hearing tonight is not the version that most channels on Gnosis and ancient texts offer. It is not the reduced version for quick consumption, nor the version that indiscriminately mixes different traditions so everything sounds more mysterious than it already is. It is the text, in its real words, contextualized within its verifiable historical tradition. And to continue offering this without depending on an algorithm that decides what can survive and what cannot, we have created a companion guide that goes much deeper into what the Gospel of Philip says about marks on the body, the cosmology of the pneuma, and the process the text calls the bridal chamber. It is called the pneumatic code. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment of this video, only available while this video is running. Stay, because what comes now is the passage of the text that nobody cites, and it is the most disconcerting of all. The Gospel of Philip has, on page 59 of the Codex, a passage that Bentley Leighton, in his critical edition of Gnostic texts, describes as one of the densest statements in the entire Nag Hammadi corpus. The text says, "One enters the bridal chamber only through an image. Whoever does not have the image will not be able to enter either into the image or into the truth." What image? The text does not specify directly, but in the section preceding this statement, the Gospel of Philip has been speaking of three types of people who approach the sacrament, and it describes how each receives something different according to their nature. The helicos, the material ones, whom the text associates with the earth and the weight of matter, receive the outer form of the sacrament without the inner substance. The psychikoi, the psychic ones, those who have a soul but not the full pneuma, receive something more, but still incomplete. And the pneumatikoi, the spiritual ones, receive what the text simply calls the light. The image required to enter the bridal chamber is, according to the internal logic of the passage, the image of the pleroma that the pneumatiko carries within, the inner mirror that reflects the source, though from the distance of matter. The lunar capacity, to receive light and return it, to contain without being the origin, to be in the world of shadow while bearing something the shadow cannot explain. And that image, that semeion of the pneuma in process, can appear on the body as what the corpus hermeticum, that other great tradition contemporary to the Gospel of Philip, calls the mark of the sphere that dominated the descent of the soul into the material world. Because here, we need to introduce another text, not to move away from the Gospel of Philip, but to see from what broader tradition its cosmology is drinking. The corpus hermeticum, that other great spiritual tradition contemporary to the Gospel of Philip that arose in Greco-Roman Alexandria, adds a layer that directly complements what the Valentinian text says about the moon. In the Poimandres, the first tractate of the Corpus Hermeticum, the soul descends into the material world passing through the 7 planetary spheres. The moon, the first sphere, the closest to the earth, imprints upon the soul the capacity to increase and decrease, to appear and disappear, to be fully and to be halfway. That lunar capacity is what allows the soul to survive within the material world, not as a gift, but as a capacity for constant transformation. But the Poimandres add something that changes the entire meaning of the descent. Whoever can wax and wane can also reverse the process. They can use that same capacity for the ascent back toward the source. The moon as the gateway into the material world, and the moon as the gateway out. The same mark that indicates descent indicates the possibility of ascent. The semeion that shows the entrance to the world of shadow is also the semeion that indicates the orientation of return. Let us return to the Gospel of Philip, because there is a passage we have not touched yet, and it is probably the most direct of all regarding what we are constructing tonight. On page 82 of the Codex, within a section that speaks of names and what names reveal and what they hide about the nature of things, the text says, "The names given to us in the world deceive us, because they make us divert our hearts from what is firm to what is not firm. Whoever hears the word God does not perceive what is firm, but what is not firm. Likewise with the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, life, light, resurrection. All these words do not designate what is real, but what is transitory. And the marks on the body? Marks on the body are not words. They cannot deceive in the same way, because they do not pass through the intellect, which can be trained to lie, to substitute reality with a more convenient representation. Marks on the body pass directly through what the Gospel of Philip calls the heart, which in this text is not the emotional organ but the center of direct knowledge. What the Gnostics called gnosis, the knowing that is not learned from the outside but recognized from within. A curve in the palm utters no words. It cannot lie because it does not speak. It simply is. It is in the body since before any word, since before any belief system the bearer has adopted or rejected, and that silent and prior being is, for the tradition of the Gospel of Philip, more reliable as a semeion than any verbal statement about who someone is or what kind of nature the one carrying the mark bears. It is important to point out here something that intellectual honesty requires us to say. The Gospel of Philip is not a palmistry manual. It was not written for the purpose of teaching how to read marks on the hands of specific people. Its objective was theological and sacramental, to explore the nature of the Valentinian pneuma, the relationship between the world of matter and the pleroma, and the process of reunion that the text calls the bridal chamber. Any reading that pulls that text out of its theological context to turn it into a system of prediction or personal diagnosis would be betraying what the text itself says that words and systems of words do: divert the heart from what is firm to what is not firm. What we are doing here is something different. It is what the Valentinian Gnostics themselves did when they read their texts: to look in the images and symbols of the text for resonances with direct experience. That is, in itself, a Gnostic method, not the literal reading that turns the text into law, not the academic reading that turns the text into a lifeless object of study, but the reading from image to image, from symbol to lived experience. Is that speculation? In part, yes. What is not speculation is what the text says: the left-right polarity and its cosmological meaning, the lunar symbolism as an image of the pneuma in process, the concept of the seal and the mark as a semeion of internal nature, the body as an image that contains hidden light. That is in the text, verifiable in the available academic translations. The connection with the crescent moon on the left palm is the Gnostic reading of the text. And there is a difference between the two that is important to keep in mind. The academic says what is written. The Gnostic asks what that writing means for the person reading it now, in this body, at this moment, with this mark on this palm. There is a passage on page 69 of the Gospel of Philip that may be the closest answer the text offers to the question of how someone knows they are pneumatico. It says, "Those who have the light cannot hide, nor can those who are in darkness become enlightened. But there are those who are in darkness and yet have fire within them. These are the ones whom the world cannot hold. That is why the world does not understand them. The world cannot hold them, not because they are superior in the sense of being better or more valuable than others, but because they are oriented by their very nature towards something that the world of matter cannot see or contain, like the moon, which reflects the light of the sun toward the earth, but whose source is not earthly and cannot be explained by the laws of the earthly world. The world does not understand them because they are made in part of something the world cannot produce from within itself." Let us return now to the beginning. Because the Gospel of Philip is a circular text, and Gnostic readings of circular texts always end where they began, but with the complete map, the crescent moon on the left palm. It is not superstition. It is not a diagnosis. It is not a certainty of any kind that exempts you from living the life you have to live. It is an image, in the precise sense of the Gospel of Philip, a thing of the material world that contains within itself a reflection of something that the material world cannot generate on its own. The moon does not create its light. It receives it and returns it. And that, in the Valentinian cosmology that produced the Gospel of Philip, is not a weakness or an inferior state. It is a function. It is the way the light of the pleroma reaches those who live in the world of matter, reflected, softened, accessible, lunar. The reflection allows eyes that could not bear the direct source to approach the brightness. The moon makes it possible to see in the darkness what the sun in its fullness would blind. Whoever carries that shape on the left palm carries, according to the symbolic logic of this text, the image of that function, the capacity to receive and return, to contain light without being its source, to be in the world of shadow while bearing something the shadow cannot explain, to fluctuate between the world of matter and something that this world has no precise name to designate. The text, on page 85 of the Codex, in one of its final and most enigmatic passages says, "Whoever has known the world has found a corpse, and whoever has found a corpse, the world is not worthy of him." It is not nihilism. It is not an invitation to reject the world in the sense of disappearing from it or not functioning within it. It is orientation. The world as a starting point, not a destination. The body as an image, not a destiny. Material life as the territory where the process occurs, not the process itself. The crescent moon on the left palm is a window, not a cage. Before this video ends, I want to tell you something directly. What you found tonight has been buried under the Egyptian desert for nearly 2 millennia, preserved inside a clay jar by someone who chose to hide it instead of burning it when they were ordered to burn it. Someone who did not know if anyone would ever read it again one day, who buried it anyway because they thought it was worth preserving. This channel exists for that very reason, because there is information that deserves to survive even if no one guarantees it will survive. YouTube removed our monetization, and yet it continues to place ads on our videos, collecting that money while we receive nothing. We tried to remove those ads so they would not interrupt what you are listening to. The platform kept putting them anyway. That is why we created the pneumatic code, not as a commercial move, but as the way this information keeps reaching those who are looking for it, without depending on a system that is actively working against us. If what you found here mattered to you, if something of what the Gospel of Philip says tonight moved something in you that you do not yet know how to name, the link is in the description and pinned in the comments below this video. This is how this channel survives and keeps speaking. Only available while this video is running. Just as the Gospel of Philip survived 2,000 years of condemnation buried in the desert, this channel intends to keep speaking. You make that possible. The Gospel of Philip in its penultimate section has a saying that its authors probably considered one of the most important in the entire text. There is no one who hides in a large and visible room, but many times there is one who hides in a small and dark place. And if there is something even more hidden than that, it is not visible in all the world. A crescent moon on a left palm is a small and dark place, a curve in the skin that most people overlook, a sign that does not speak in words, that does not present itself, that does not ask to be noticed. The Gospel of Philip, buried in a clay jar in the desert of Egypt for nearly 2,000 years, describes exactly the kind of thing the world cannot hold. The light that has no source of its own but exists anyway, visible, undeniable, etched into matter as if someone had put it there before consciousness arrived to recognize it. What does someone do with that? The text does not answer. No text answers that, because that is exactly the kind of question no text can answer from the outside. Only you know what happened in your body when you looked at your left palm at the beginning of this video. Only you know if what you felt was superficial curiosity or something you recognized from deeper within than you can explain in words. And that, says the Gospel of Philip, is already the beginning of something that has no name yet, but which carries, since long before you knew it, an image on the skin.